Just one day I was going through your profile and I really amazed like you had a very good chemistry with IT and fintech industry.
I have an experience of around 15 to 20 years in the software industry, and I started my journey with a couple of fintech companies. It's been last 5 months since I started my own company.
I personally believe like working for 70 hours a week it's not much productive. So what's your take on it?
There are multiple things, obviously, that are going wrong. Like we talk about corruption, or we talk about the political scenarios and so on. Like how after independence, how it came along.
Welcome, Mr. Bharat, welcome to Talkiepedia. So, before we move further into the show, let me tell you the purpose of this podcast. So, basically, we want to know your journey and take some career insights from you for the upcoming graduates or working professionals. So, let's dive into the show. So, can you give a brief introduction about yourself and your education qualification?
Sure, Nanjan. Thank you for welcoming, and happy to share my journey with the viewers. It's going to help others definitely. So, I have an experience of around 15 to 20 years in the software industry, and I started my journey with a couple of fintech companies, and then going into the last 5 months. It's been last 5 months since I started my own company. I'm working on a product based out of logistics. So prior to that, in my last role in a German-based company, I was working on a SaaS product. So as director of engineering, I was responsible for the technical deliverables of the engineering center in Hyderabad, and I was graduated in 2006 from MGIT in Hyderabad. I post-graduated from IIT Madras in 2009. So all through I was in computer science engineering. I had that background since the beginning. I had interest in programming. I was fond of programming since my graduation days, and right now just ventured into my own company.
So, after plus two, when we enter into bachelor's, when we enter into college, there are lots of confusion and curiosity as well. So, what were your initial challenges as a bachelor's student?
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of my friends, and even now I've seen a lot of graduates. So people always have that question of what after graduation, right? So there is always that confusion in mind whether someone has to go for higher studies, or maybe an MBA or MS or a master's in technology, or whether it's about getting into job, like focusing on that career. Because some people say we might be wasting time doing masters, rather just get into industry 2 years ahead. So the way I would see it is, one, it depends upon how interested you are in learning technology. Of course, learning is something that you have to just continue doing even when you get to work. So the other part, of course, is about if you are getting into industry, there are advantages too. Like because, for example, you, as I said earlier, so you get into the industry 2 years ahead. So that means you have 2 years plus career when you compare with your peers, right? So you can focus on getting higher to higher stature in your career much ahead of time. So that is going to definitely help. But the key, what I felt was lacking earlier, was about how the industry and the educational institutions are connected. Right? There is always a lot of gap between what you learn in your college versus what you actually use in the industry. Right? So if that can be understood well, and if students can focus on, okay, what is that I absolutely need to learn to get into industry? What are the skills, core skills that I would need? So then I think it would help. And the other thing that would definitely benefit is the networking. Right? So a lot of people, if they are in a particular position now, so a lot of it might have to do with actually what kind of network they have, like how they're able to talk to other people and then get an understanding of the opportunities and so on.
Like as you said, there are lots of resources out there and lots of opportunity. But as a student, when I face this thing, so what tech stacks to choose, what technology to choose? So what advice would you like to give?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very good question. So essentially, what I've seen is, earlier maybe there were like 2 or 3 popular programming languages when I started, when I got into the industry.
But now there are lots of programming languages.
There are like so many now. Like it's practically not possible to cope up with everything, right? But one key thing here is, if you are strong with the fundamentals, right? So no matter what technology or framework comes in, so it's always going to be a cakewalk to basically get into that. Right? So after all, you're using the technology to basically solve a problem. Right? So the way you solve it, obviously, is going to change, but the important thing is how do you apply that technology into your problem, right? So that is the key. So if you're talking about it, so even not just with freshers, but even the people who are in the industry, right? They would also need to just cope up with the new trends in the technology. They have to, understand new technologies, and even the companies have become so competitive these days. So if the company cannot afford, to lay on to basically stay on some really old tech stack, they spend a lot of amount of time, even money and resources, on actually upgrading their tech stack. So that is very important because especially because of the security vulnerabilities that keep coming every day, right? So it has become important for many reasons, not more reasons. But again, the key here is you have to always focus on the fundamentals. If you're strong with that, I think you can actually grasp any technology very easily. That's what I would say.
So as we were talking, you got a placement after your graduation, but you left that job and you went to pursue masters.
Yeah.
What made you to do that?
Yeah. So again, so I had that ambition to get into research when I was doing my engineering. I wanted to get into research. So MS and possibly, I mean, masters and then possibly PhD, doctorate is what I was thinking. But so that's why I attempted GATE during my final year of engineering. So I had an outside chance of getting into IITs. I got close to 200, so I wasn't sure whether I would be able to get into IIT. So that's why I reattempted. So because I wanted to reattempt, I joined the company because I thought I would also get exposure into the industry. I get a feel of the industry, and like looking back, I think it definitely helped me because when I got into the industry after my masters, so it helped me. I already had some segue into how the industry looks like, what are the technology stacks, or so on. Like it definitely helped me, and even to get some internships during my masters. So that also helped me. So that would be an option, I would say.
And there is this trend going on, like most of the students are opting for doing masters in abroad. So what made you to do masters in India, not in abroad?
Yeah, again, that's a very valid question because I had thoughts about MS. Of course, I always had was willing to do masters, but I had thoughts about MS versus MTech in India. So I want to choose between these two. So I wanted to stay close to my family. I wanted to be in India, not go abroad. That's why I chose masters in India, and I wanted to pick the best institutes if I wanted to do masters. So that's why I went for MTech and IIT. But again, like possibly it will help students who aspire for MS because what I would say is with respect to MS, the competition have become huge. Like now it's much competitive than what it was earlier, right? So, and especially after COVID, because of the rush of the students going into MS next years, right?
So what do you think that major issue why they are opting for doing MS in abroad and not in India?
Yeah, so of course I spoke to a lot of people who went for MS, right? So what I felt was people who aspired to go for MS to learn something, like to upgrade their technology skills or whatever it is, like with respect to that particular sector, right? So people who have gone there with that motive have eventually and consequentially, so they actually got into good jobs. But a lot of people I've seen go to MS with the mindset of just making money, and a lot of times it didn't work. So that's what I've seen in my experience. So I think it's very important to have that objective in mind to be able to upgrade yourself in terms of that particular sector. So, but if you're talking about, for example, just in terms of making money, I think that's not going to work. So that's what I felt.
So you made a very big shift in your life, from Tier 3 to IIT Madras. So what were your initial challenges when you entered into IIT?
So masters is definitely different from BTech in IIT. So what I would say is the environment is very different in terms of the college. So the number of things that go on every day, so different clubs that you can, for example, be part of, whether you talk about music or sports or the events that happen. So like coping up with all these along with, not compromising on your academics is obviously a big challenge when you get into IIT. So the first 3 to 6 months, you'll get used to that environment, and then eventually you would be much better at handling that. That's what I had.
So you said about clubs in IIT. So how those clubs will be beneficial for normal students?
Yeah, I mean, so like for example, if you have a particular taste about, let's say, music, or you have taste about, let's say, organizing an event, right? So there are a number of things.
Yes.
So if you have perspective or interest towards some area, then there are always opportunities where you can shine in that area. So these are all things that are like absolutely out of and apart from academics, right? So here you're able to get to interact with other people, dignitaries, or even you're able to invite people into meetings, or you're able to interact with a lot of celebrities, let's say, or you can learn some stuff. You can develop a hobby. You can anything, like whether it's about sports or reading books or particular area, anything.
So how IIT made a difference in your life when it comes to a mindset or personality?
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's both challenging and beneficial. I would say in both ways, because there's always expectation when someone says someone is from IIT. There's always expectation that they would do well, they would excel in life or whatever. But again, so what I felt was it always helped me get that initial opportunity, right? So probably possibly ahead of others, but it definitely depends upon in this case myself, right? Of how well I'm able to use that opportunity, right? So because it comes with a cost, right? So because there are expectations, if you're not able to cope up with that expectations, then like people will just take you for granted, right? So that's how it is. So it is always challenging to reach that expectation.
So we all have role models or mentors. So who are your mentors and role models when you were in your bachelor's and masters?
Right. Yeah. So probably I'll start even much earlier because I always had people who I looked up to. So I would say the first one is definitely my father. He happens to be a professor, not in my field. He's into commerce, but like as I was growing, right? So as a child, so I saw him so many times. Like he was very fond of reading books. He was fond of actually getting to learn new things and actually also teach others, right? So that kind of really made me passionate about how you learn stuff and how you also share with others, right? So that definitely is the first big thing that I had. And going into my schooling, like I had people who, I mean, my fellow students, right, my fellow classmates, or who I got inspired by. Like there was one guy I remember who I was really fond of how he wrote, like for example, cursive writing.
Yeah.
So I just saw that and then okay, maybe I have to learn this. Like I was so fascinated about his writing. So I started learning cursive writing. So that was I think in my sixth standard. So similarly, there were people who, for example, someone was really good at sports. Someone was really good at like design patterns. Like at that time there was no software or anything, so he just used to draw by hand. So now, if you talk about like in the recent times, I'm a big fan of Virat Kohli and also Elon Musk, right? So of course, like the first thing that stands out for both of them is how passionate they are about what they do, right? So that ultimately I think is what matters in life, like whatever you do, right? Like people always say there is someone is talented or whatever, but what I feel is talent is of no use, right? Without actually doing your work, and that's what I always look up to from people like that.
I would like to ask this question: how do you handle rejections and failures in your life?
Yeah, so that's not easy, right? Because again, the thing is whether you know really go down after that rejection or whether you come up is what matters, right? So what I felt was it always helps if you have people around you who can be there with you during those times, right? During the tough times. So of course, like everyone would have someone like that, like so it's a wife or parents or your siblings, your kids, anyone. So it could be anyone, but you have to actually learn from your mistakes, is what I feel, right? Because if you analyze, for example, and understand, so what went wrong at that particular situation, why we had a failure, I think you can definitely come back better. So there's only learning.
This one day I was going through your profile and I really amazed, like you had a very good chemistry with IT and fintech industry. So how did you get into Microsoft?
after my graduation, after I got into HCL Technologies through the campus placement. I was placed in Microsoft as a vendor employee. So I worked.
What does vendor employment?
Yeah, so vendor employee is basically the concept of Microsoft. So there used to be the full-time employee and then the vendor employees who they hire from various companies and mostly service-based companies. And they work, they're deployed on actual projects and teams within Microsoft and they work along with them. So that is how it was. So basically, I was not a full-time employee. I worked in MS Office team. So basically, they were dealing with the development of Office tools. So I was actually SDET. So SDET stands for Software Development Engineer and Test.
Okay.
So now I believe the role is no more. But again, back then there were automation engineers. I was mainly involved in automation of these efforts. But again, so there's not much you learn within like 1 year.
Yes.
Right? So there are a lot of things that you have to keep grasping. So I learned a lot of things about the environment, like how things work, even technical and even in terms of the culture. Right? So I even remember one incident that I wanted to share. One of my colleagues, who was actually a senior to me, was discussing with my lead, like in their cabin. And then I was assigned a task before that. So I was just working on that, and then I had some question. I just immediately ran into them in between their discussions and then just asked a question. But it was very odd because that shift came. I understood that it felt odd only after some time. Right?
So how challenging it was for you, like from transition from a fresher to
exactly.
software?
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about, right?
Yes.
This is exactly relevant.
Okay.
So
these were the challenges you faced as
yes,
well?
yes.
Okay.
So in terms of the culture, right? So you need to understand that you're no more a college grad, like you are actually getting into the corporate world. So it takes some time, but once you get used to it, obviously you grow further. But two aspects that definitely stand out is in terms of one, how you work, like not in silos, but in teams, right? You have to learn to work with the teams and go along with the team, right? So that is one key skill that you have to learn. And of course, definitely the other thing is you have to have that social skill as well, like apart from the technical skill, which definitely needs to be there. So otherwise, you cannot get along with others. So that is very important.
So you cracked placements in your graduation and post-graduation as well. So what advice would you like to give someone who wants to crack a job as a fresher?
Yeah, I think a lot of people also ask this question to me personally, right? So what I feel is it's very important to actually prepare for the placements, right? So because no matter how much you think you know, right, it is still very important to actually focus on fundamentals and be prepared for the interviews. You always have this question like whether I should learn this technology, that technology, what area should I learn, and all these. But again, like one aspect that you have to keep in mind is people who are actually coming to pick someone, right? Select someone. So they're not looking for people who have already worked on that technology, right? So they are looking at people who are good at basics, right, and who have that appetite to learn new things, right? And if you can actually demonstrate that, then I think it'll become much easier, right? Strong hold is on the fundamentals, and even the things that are being tested, right, during the placements are also based on that. It's not based on some really new technology that people do not expect students to understand or know. That is the key, I would believe.
So like you worked for many different companies. So if any professionals want to switch or transition their career, so what advice would you like to give them?
Yeah, I think what happens is when you get into the industry, right? So I always believed the first 3 to 5 years into your career, so you should spend on exploring things, like exploring different areas, different aspects of, let's say, software engineering. So people have this misconception that software engineering is all about coding, right? But obviously, if you're talking about corporate companies, product companies, right? So there are much more roles than actually just being developer, right? So there are so many other roles, like you can be designer, you can be product manager, right? So there are so many other roles that you can get into. So you have to first explore the different options, understand how technology works, like how software engineering works. So then you can possibly offer, okay, now I understand this is my specialty or specialization area. So I would focus on that. Like I would focus on enhancing my skills in that area. So I've seen a lot of people do that, but like again, like no one comes into the industry saying that I want to become the next big DevOps engineer or anything, right? So it's obviously about understanding that particular role, like understanding that figuring out your interest area, and then like further enhancing that into your career.
You are a
What I do.
director of engineering, I
Yes.
guess. So, what advice would you like to give to the working professional and where they are lagging as a working professional?
So, like I was part of the recruiting team in multiple companies I worked during my career, right? So as a result, I was saying that I did a number of interviews, right? So what happened is like sometimes it's really surprising that people do not have that fundamentals, right? So people like having on paper saying that they have like 3 years, 5 years experience, but still they're not able to answer even basic questions, right? So always that is important is what I feel like. Someone says they're DevOps or whatever, like it's not about just learning the technology, like how to use that tool and so on. Right? It's about why are you using that tool, where do you apply that tool or that technology, and why are you applying, right? If these questions are answered, I think they'll be better positioned in order to get to their next role or even switch companies. And that's what I feel. So that's where again the gap is. Like people even on the job, so they are uh, trying to just get the things moving. But apart from that, if they focus on starting asking questions, right? So why they are doing it, how does it fit in to the overall bigger picture, right? So if they understand those things, I think then they are better placed.
Recently, a very misunderstood statement by Mr. Narayan Murthy. I'll read that statement for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
audience. India's work productivity is one of the lowest in the world. Our youngsters must say, "This is my country. I want to work 70 hours a week." They are the ones that can build the country with gusto. I personally believe, working for 70 hours a week, it's not much productive. So, what's your take on it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting statement because again, like there's a lot of buzz in social media
Yeah,
about
there was
that
lots of
statement, a lot of
trolling and
analysis on that. So of course, again, I had my take on it definitely. So again, the word productivity here is very important, right? So it's very important to understand what productivity is, right? So and that statement I believe is particularly about a country like India, right? So I do not take that in the literal sense of having every person to work for 70 hours, but the way I would take it is we are in such a position where we need to be better at how productive we are. Like for example, you work for 1 hour or 2 hours, how much work you're able to get done, versus you work for 4 hours, 5 hours, how much work you're able to get done. Right? So often I think we need to get better at how much value add we are able to give per unit of time. Right? And that is where the key is. Like the way I understood that statement was we are lacking those skills in order to be more productive. And if we are able to learn those skills, which means we have to work more, like whether it's 70 hours or whatever. So basically, I understand it as you do whatever it takes to be more productive and get better and more efficient at what you do. So
Yeah.
that's how I
Don't
see
you
it.
think, offering very lowest package to the graduates or aspirants and expecting them to work for 70 hours a week, is it a fair thing? I know they are offering higher packages as well. Then what about the lower packages? You are offering lower package, but you are expecting them to work 70 hours a week. So is it a fair enough thing?
Yeah, I think overall, if you look at it, that's how that business works. Right? If you're talking about service companies, so that's how they make profit. Right? So that is the business perspective of it. But if you look at, of course, I cannot comment on why they're offered such low packages, right? But what I can definitely say is, even I've seen a lot of people make switches, right, from such companies, and then they go into other product companies or other companies which have like even 200, 300% hike, right? So they are able to do it. That's because they have actually upskilled themselves and they're able to do things better, right? So that's how we see it. So whether that is fair enough or not, I would say it's a different angle. But with respect to what people have to offer in terms of what they can do, what is in their hands, I would say you get better at what you do.
Okay. So, Bharat, I would like to go off the topic then. Off the topic. So, when I was in schooling or high school, a graduating student, the one common thing I heard is like India is a developing country, right? Since my past 10, 15 years. So, where we are lagging as a nation, we are known for the huge youth population. So where we are lagging as a nation, where we are lagging as a youth, can you just?
Yeah, I think um, I always learned it like from my childhood and even from like really good idols that I look up to, right? Personalities that I look up to. So there is no shortcut to success, right? So like, but a lot of the mentality that we have right now, right? So there are people who think that they want to get things done like in an easier way. Of course, again, this is not in
So,
terms of productivity,
like
right?
if you see, lots of country started with us. Let's take an example of Japan.
Yeah.
They started with us, like after independence, after World War II, after 70 or 75 years. If we look at their infrastructure, they're way more developed than
Yes.
us.
Yes.
So why they are known for their technology, they're known for their infrastructure, and why we are known as like highest unemployment rate or poverty thing. So why there is this gap?
I think the biggest factor I would say is definitely population, right?
Okay.
Even though it's an asset for us, it's obviously also difficult to get to that state, right? With the huge amount of population that we have, right? And with respect to the diversity, there's so much diversity, and there are multiple things obviously that are going wrong, like whether you talk about corruption or whether you talk about the political scenarios and so on, like how after independence how it came along, but uh, what is in your control in terms of each person, right? So you should be able to get successful in terms of adding more value to the country, right? So that's how you look at it. Like if you look at in terms of just making money, obviously like we go nowhere, right? So whether you talk about business or whether you talk about profession or anything, so whether you're able to add value to the country is what matters, and that's how a country develops.
Okay. What do you think where the youngsters are lagging in terms of mindset or in terms of skills? So much like unemployment rate, and people are moving to abroad and not doing a job here. So why our unemployment rate is high, even though we have a huge youth population and we have a number of opportunities out there. So where the current youth is lacking? I want to know that, like from your perspective, as you have interacted with many students out there.
Yeah.
So is it a distraction or is it a lack of awareness? What's your perception of it?
I think it's a mix of both. Like, so because I've seen a lot of people, like having that ambition. Like, I would not say even ambition, having that will, right? So to basically get better at the job or do better things at life. But not everyone is actually making the effort, like enough effort, right? You just wish for something, right? It would not happen.
Yes.
So you would have to put in enough efforts, and that's where I think the youth has to change. Is what I believe.
Okay, Bharat, let's enter into buzzer round. So I'll throw a few words and you have to answer it quickly. So AI,
Potential.
India in 2040.
I think developed country.
The worst career advice you have ever got.
Switch your career.
And what's the best career advice you have ever got?
Entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Bharat. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and wish you all the best.
Thank you.